Welcome to Chemically Speaking. Today's guest, Dr. Joesph Okeme, an assistant professor of chemistry at chemical biology at McMaster University. Joesph does extremely interesting work on environmental and atmospheric chemistry, including work on identifying forever chemicals, and I added in here creating unique passive sampling devices. I didn't know how much you could talk about that, and among a whole bunch of other things that we will talk about. So, Joesph, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks for having me.
All right. So I want to dive right in to forever chemicals, PFAS. Can you explain, sort of to a general audience, what PFAS is and what forever chemicals are, and why we should care about them?
Everyone talks about PFAS these days, and just like it's described, forever chemicals, that suggests that they're very persistent in the environment. They will be around in the environment for a long time. What's interesting about PFAS is we actually need their functionality. We would like things that are very durable. For instance, if you're out in the rain, you'd like to wear some waterproof jacket. But then those things that we desire about them are the aspects that are at the same time problematic. So PFAS are a broad class of chemicals. The US EPA says there are over 6,000, depending on who it's estimating or classifying, they're just a lot. And there are a wide range, meaning that they have different properties depending on what they want to be used for. So that's a simple way. An example would be the Teflon coating you'd find in pans, the non-stick pans, and then wrinkle-free clothing items, for instance, contain PFAS.
Oh, okay. Wouldn't have thought that.
Yes.
So they're like in a lot of stuff.
Most things have them, and then because they've been used widely for different applications, it means you'd find them in the environment, in the air we breathe, find them in food, especially food packaging that might have non-stick appearance.
Okay.
That means they would find their ways into food and then the environmental systems, which means humans will become exposed to them and the ecosystem will be exposed to them.
That's interesting. So when I first heard of forever chemicals, I immediately thought like plastics and just your general plastics, but then I looked into it a little bit, and it's more just carbon chains which contain a lot of fluorines.
Yes, absolutely. And because of that fluorine being very electronegative, I don't know how much chemistry we can talk about.
We can get into it, but general audience, but we can explain it.
Yeah, so they're not just, you've got polymeric PFAS.
Okay.
So they're not any different from how, just like you're trying to describe plastic.
Okay. So like when we think of it, we're thinking of two different things, and are there some plastics that contain it and some that don't contain it? Is that fair?
There are different materials, like plastic in general would be different things,
different.
Yes.
Okay.
But then the idea of how they're synthesized, which it's doing polymerization and having those tiny building blocks.
Okay.
They're similar.
Okay.
In that respect.
Okay, cool. And so as for kind of environmental and hazards, can you talk a little bit about that? Like, why should we care about forever chemicals?
In general, people are concerned about them because of these properties they display being forever or that persist in the environment. What that means is that's how long they will be around to cause environmental problems and health problems. And some of them might include the association with cancer, for example, and a number of potential health problems. So that's been found in mostly animal studies. And of course, we know that what affects biological systems would affect human beings. And what's scary about PFAS is we can now measure them in almost everyone.
That's scary.
So the large-scale human health or biomonitoring studies like the National Health and Nutrition Survey, NHANES for short, that's the US population-based study has measured PFAS of a wide range of concentrations or levels in different people. So you'd find PFAS in human breast milk, for instance,
Okay.
and that has implications for a baby being fed, for example.
That's crazy.
So that's why no one wants to have
Yeah.
PFAS around and
But
in
it's
our
obviously
systems.
something that's huge. Like,
Yeah.
we all want to stay dry.
Exactly. So that's where the tension is. I
Yeah.
teach sustainable chemistry, and we try and talk about trade-offs all the time. The very functionalities that we want in
Yeah.
can be problematic. And then trying to think about alternatives. And quite often when alternatives are introduced, then they have to have similar properties to.
Yeah.
So we get into this problem of regrettable substitution. So it's
Okay.
it's quite tricky of a problem.
Have we found an alternative, would you say? Or is there
I
any?
think that requires collaboration with industry folks and researchers
Yeah.
and scientists to try and come up with new materials and chemicals that would serve the functions that we want in. Can we now decide that we don't want them for everything?
Okay.
Are there safer alternatives that would likely biodegrade faster? So it's an interesting area where we're needing a lot of expertise, especially talented students to consider doing
Yeah.
research in such areas.
It's definitely interesting.
Yeah, it really is.
I know. I feel like every time I go on my phone, it's like something about forever chemicals.
Yes.
And so I'm like, bam, this
Yeah.
is emerging. And so you, correct me if I'm wrong, but also make so your passive air sampling devices,
Mm-hmm.
is that, can you use that to detect PFAS? And can you talk about the general use of passive air samplers?
Absolutely. I'm very interested broadly in the areas of environmental and analytical chemistry
Okay.
that has to do with developing accessible tools and technologies that would allow us better characterize or understand what people are exposed to, what the ecosystem is exposed to.
Okay.
So one approach is using passive sampling devices because they don't require being powered.
Okay.
For instance, if you're interested in knowing how clean the air is, what levels of chemicals we've got and we're breathing in daily, you can use an approach that involves using electricity to pump air through some sub-end tube, or just think of it as a filter.
Okay.
And then taking that to the lab to analyze. So such kinds of devices are quite expensive, an
Yeah.
average of about $3,000. So my group is focusing more on passive devices that just use diffusion or air current if you like.
Okay.
And chemicals would move from the air, for example, to the passive sampling device. An example would be glasses that we're developing. And then we've also developed very simple ways that we can extract those chemicals and measure them. So when I'm saying simple, we want it to be simple such that everyone can participate in the research study.
Yeah.
So I think that it's a description of what a passive sampler and some of the passive sampling tools that we're developing.
Just kind of
looks
something that
like.
passively idles
Yes.
beside you and collects data.
Exactly, yeah. It's not bothering you, it's not
Yeah.
noisy around you, and anything really can be used as a passive sampler.
Okay. Because I took part in your study where I got to wear those goggles.
Are you allowed to say that?
Can I?
Yeah,
Can I
you
say
can.
that? I
Yes,
should've
it's
checked.
up. You're the one, yes, saying it.
Okay. It was just really cool to me that you can gather so much data from something so simple.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just in the passive sampling field. We've been having lots of conversations around what really wouldn't bother people
Okay.
and would capture the kind of information we want. So some examples might be people wearing wristbands. At the same time, just like we're talking now, our wrists on the table.
Yeah.
So is it possible the wristbands would capture other things that might not reflect what we're breathing?
Okay.
You could also place the sampler in the room, but that's stationary. It doesn't follow you around, so that doesn't reflect your own personal exposure. So the idea of, because we're very interested, everyone cares about the air that they're breathing. So being around the breathing zone, being one around the face, I think it's a clever idea.
Yeah, and it would be really neat to like, because like you said, when I'm just living my normal day, I don't think about what I'm inhaling or anything like that. But in reality, it's probably, there's some stuff.
Absolutely. And that some people are more sensitive than others. If someone has asthma, for example, and someone wears some kind of perfume around, and that could trigger asthma attacks or allergies. That's when it becomes obvious. So, but we don't know that even if you're generally healthy day to day, you're breathing in things that might be problematic.
Right. Yeah. And we don't think about it until we're like 70 years old with cancer, and we're like, oh God, what was I exposed to?
Yeah, and that's absolutely, it's that chronic exposure at very low levels, and they would accumulate, and over time they might begin to show themselves in the form of different health problems.
That's really cool.
Thank you.
Really cool. I didn't know that was your research until I got to partake. And
Thanks for participating.
Really
we'll keep you posted when the results are out and we're publishing.
Yeah, sorry if I wasn't supposed to.
No, I was just saying that I couldn't disclose that you had participated because I didn't even know until you mentioned it yourself. So that's good. Okay.
Well, yes, yeah. It was fun. I saw a paper. I read a bit of it. I had some long train rides this weekend, so I could do some reading on using tears as like a biomonitor instead of using like urine or blood. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Like I mentioned, we're always thinking about accessible methods.
Yeah.
And when you rely on traditional approaches like the pump that I mentioned, or for biomonitoring, if you're relying on collecting people's blood and their urine samples, or maybe even biopsy, these methods are very invasive.
Yeah.
The elderly cannot truly participate. So we've been thinking about what approaches can we introduce that people can allow people to participate, one, from the comfort of their homes, and then they're not invasive and they're not expensive. So one underexplored biological matrix, if you like, one would be tears.
Yeah.
And some studies have shown that tears contain sufficient information that can tell us about people's exposures and people's health.
Okay.
There's a sufficient overlap between chemicals or metabolites you'd find in tears and in blood. So the question we're asking is, can we, not like we want to make people cry, that's not the goal.
Punch them or something.
Can we explore the biochemical information in tears?
Okay.
And since that's not very, very expensive and people are happy to provide tear samples in some kind of form, can we now develop that method such that in the nearest future people wouldn't really need to provide blood samples, except it's incredibly necessary.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And like when I think, like, what comes to my mind immediately is diabetes. Like, obviously you think blood. To me, I don't know anything about it, so it seems like an issue like that, tears could be a bit of a stretch, but do you see some way that you can, like, overcome big gaps like that?
Absolutely. I think even people can measure glucose levels in tears already.
Okay.
So our big picture goal here, I would say, is for any health outcome, if we had two different populations or if we had participants from a very wide pool, like diverse populations.
Yeah.
And then we've sampled their tears. I might get into different ways of sampling them if we have time. And then we have this database where we can correlate these markers to people's health status. What that means is basic screening at the very basic level of screening.
Okay.
We can tell people that have high risk for certain health problems, more like being predictive, and the ones that are flagged as being high risk can now be prioritized for more rigorous evaluation. So if we're doing that, then that really slashes the burden on the healthcare system and labs.
Right, okay. You just took me back to like third year analytical chem with Dr. Britz, because I remember him talking about how it's important to, you could do like a big study, an easy study, and then narrow it down.
Yes.
And have like your percent error very small in your large study, and then
Correct, absolutely. And if you think about cancer monitoring, like mammography, for instance, just the whole process itself, it's quite invasive.
Yeah.
And and it's expensive. So is there any way of narrowing down to people that actually really need it?
Yeah.
Something like that.
That's really cool. Speaking of tears, this is just came up to my mind. I guess I've never really considered what tears actually are, because you say they contain a lot of information. To me, it's like, oh, it's just water coming out of my eyes. Can you talk about tears? Because I actually don't know.
Absolutely. So tears actually come from the plasma.
Okay.
Tears are a plasma ultrafiltrate.
Okay.
What we like about tears, especially in this case, since it's a plasma ultrafiltrate, it means it's a cleaner form of biological matrix.
So it's really coming out of like your blood?
It's coming out of the blood. Okay, yeah. So it's coming out of the blood, and it's in a clean form. So if you had blood, for instance, or urine, then you have to try and clean them up before you can inject them into your instrument when doing the actual measurements.
Okay.
So this is already been filtered in many ways. And it has a number of several layers. You've got lipids as probably forming the outer layer. Then within just the mid part, you have more of water.
Okay.
And then you have protein as well. So it might not be in that order that I'm mentioning, but then it contains chemicals that you might, or metabolites that you'd find in. So it's very rich. It might just seem like it. It's more than 90% water for sure. But
I remember hearing about, so obviously you work on tears. Mm-hmm. Are there other kind of biomonitoring things that you're looking at? Because I read about analyzing hair. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, people try and use different things, especially the ones that are easy to get to. For instance, hair. Yeah. Because someone's hair grows for a long time, that means it carries the history of someone's exposure.
Right.
So some studies have measured metal levels in tears. I'm not doing hair. Okay. So did I say tears? In hair, yeah. They've measured metal levels in hair. Okay. I'm not doing hair. But for our own research, would like to validate the new method, like the idea of using tears now, which is relatively new, against blood, for example, and urine. More broadly, if I'm doing any kind of study, either organizing or participating, and it involves using traditional matrices like blood and urine, we do have the capability to do that, and we're doing that too. Yeah. It's great to be able to apply chemistry concepts to real life problems. I mean, we do a lot of fundamental aspects, but they're applied. That helps or contributes to helping solve problems we've got in society. It's very important.
Between topics here, kind of going
Of course.
back to like environmental hazards. Are there things in the environment that people should know about? Like, I'm sure there's a lot of things that are pretty toxic out there. This is a big question. Obviously, forever chemicals being one, but are there like prominent toxins that we should know about?
Absolutely. Another class of chemical, another class is flame retardants. I'm not sure if
Okay.
you've heard about that.
Yeah.
So they're in couches, then all kinds of stuff. And the idea is when you add just like this, it sounds to prevent fire, like retard fire. And over time, these chemicals migrate from whatever they've been added, the consumer products, into the environment, and then we breathe them in.
Right.
And they would find their ways into the wastewater system, for example. Phthalates are another class, and you find them in lots of personal care products.
Okay. They're everywhere.
They're everywhere. So we try not to put the burden on individuals to protect themselves.
Yeah.
This is where regulations have to come in, and the government has a huge role to play, and people in the industry have that responsibility to produce chemicals that won't be very, very harmful or even harmful.
One thing that's always interested me is because people say, oh, we don't really know what causes cancer. And it's hard to narrow that down because there's so many forms and so huge amounts of variation in cancer. But then you'll hear certain drugs and not drugs, but chemicals like tobacco, for instance. You smoke that, you're likely going to get, lung cancer or whatever. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because, like, for me, not having a background in that, I'm just interested in how we've kind of concluded that these certain chemicals are causing this, and
Absolutely. The conversation it's been going on from the beginning of time, nature versus nurture.
Yeah.
Is it are we penalized completely based on our genes? How much do genetic factors contribute to the likelihood of having cancers or any kind of chronic health problems? And from what most studies are showing, including the hugely funded Genome-Wide Association study, which made us sequence the human genome, the results from the Genome-Wide Association study are showing it's that our genes don't contribute hugely to whether we have cancer or not, meaning there are other factors, and in most of them are environmental factors. Some other studies, for instance, studies that have looked at migrants or immigrants, that's the right word, of different generations. For instance, those that moved from Japan to the US. Then after the first generation, moving to the second generation now began having the health problems or cancer rates that people in the US have. What that means is the environment it's contributing, and that would include the kind of job you've got, the kind of food you're eating, and all kinds of environmental exposures. So at the moment, an emerging area of research, it's called the exposome. And what that means is the goal is to try and characterize all these factors that are non-genetic. And then to assign risk factors to them. For instance, like you described, if someone was smoking, then how much would that contribute to the likelihood of having lung cancer? So I think overwhelmingly we have evidence to show that factors from chemical exposures and lifestyle, for instance, is someone being active, doing a lot of physical activities compared to some sedentary lifestyle. and then the kind of food that we eat, exposures through food, and stress. Stress, it's another huge factor.
Okay.
Yeah, all these combined
Yeah.
are more influential in whether someone would end up with a chronic health problems than how genetic factors would predispose us.
I think there's a lot of gray area, at least to the general public, on, what's actually causing health issues.
Yes.
And it's really neat to hear that it's not all genetic. And like you say, it seems to be not, or mostly not genetic.
Exactly, which it's great news, you know what I mean? Meaning we can modify these factors. They're described as modifiable factors.
Okay. And so the one article that I read about the PFAS, so you're trying to get, if I understand that correct, the government of Canada to put it on their list of toxic molecules? Is that?
One of the chemicals that would be, if you like, prioritized for risk assessment.
Okay.
That we should do something about, like phase out when it's necessary. So that's what the conversations are about.
Got it.
I attended a conference where especially some folks on the industry side are saying that the regular risk assessment was not done before these compounds have been, or these chemicals have been listed already. Yeah. But I think that suggests how they're chemicals of great priority.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if you've heard about the, what's that word? Like taking precautions, the precautionary principle. If you have an indication that something would be bad for a whole population, I think it's better to take a step to try and prevent that than to say, oh, maybe not, it wouldn't be something to worry about.
It's kind of like the opposite of asking for forgiveness.
Yeah, it will, exactly.
You don't want to have to pull it back off the shelves. I remember learning about the thalidomide. Yeah.
As an example, that was an absolute disaster.
Yeah, some mothers took this drug as a anti-nausea.
Yes, and then it's affected the fetus.
Yeah, interesting in that, we know that every day we're introducing new things to our world, and we don't actually know, 10 years from now
what the impact will be. I think that's one of the reasons McMaster, for instance, it's very invested in a sustainable chemistry program. You've got chemists who are the ones synthesizing all cool stuff. If you hear of any application or there's a need for something else to be synthesized, chemists do it. There's chemistry everywhere, playing that very important role.
Yeah.
Now then, we're still the ones that are positioned to solve the problems that chemistry might cause. Chemistry does a lot of good things, and then some things that might not be good. At the same time, chemists are positioned. So chemistry training should have the aspect of that would create the awareness. When you're designing, are you thinking about the long-term impact? Can we design and synthesize or create things that would be good for the environment?
Yeah, it's kind of like chemists are making sure they have job security, do one job poorly and then come back
fix it.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the sustainable chemistry program, because it's definitely a new thing-ish?
Yeah, it is. I'd like to talk about it. So when I joined Mark, that was around 3 years ago. My goodness, just yesterday was exactly 3 years ago.
Oh, wow. Happy third year.
Thank you. And I heard about the program. I was just very, very excited to participate. So Dr. Gillian Goward and Dr. Mike Broke and a few folks introduced the program before I came. Okay. And it's designed to prepare chemists or to train chemists or those going through chemistry programs here to have that awareness and the skills to develop products and processes that would be sustainable for the environment in general.
Okay.
So that's what it's about. I'm involved in the second year sustainable chemistry, which is quite introductory,
Yeah.
where students get to learn about the concepts, the green principle concepts, and how they can apply them day to day. For instance, what solvent are you going to choose? Why are you choosing this solvent instead of another one for your synthesis? How are you going to dispose of chemicals in after doing your experimental work in the lab? Generally to inspire their interest in sustainable chemistry. There is a first year introductory course that's just been newly introduced.
Oh, okay.
So that's very, very good.
Yeah.
And Sharona and Jim are the ones
good.
teaching the course. Then the fourth year, it's an introduction to toxicology.
Okay.
From that sustainable chemistry perspective. So we teaching students or training students to be familiar with the idea that whatever you create, it can be poisonous.
Yeah.
And then from the safety perspective, toxicology as a field of safety, if you like, those two components. Those response, how much would someone get exposed to, or will the environment become exposed to before it becomes problematic? What choices can we make doing the risk assessment at a very small scale and at a much bigger scale? As an example, saying, could the activities of a company, maybe a steel factory or a steel company, how much would that impact people living in Hamilton, as an example? I think it's something that most institutions should.
Is Mac
introduce.
The only one with it right now, or are there other schools developing this program?
Queen's has green and sustainable chemistry program.
Okay.
I know University of Toronto. I'm not sure if it's actually a course or there is an institute that does that. Certainly, Mark, it's one of them institutions.
I know for me, when I was coming into first year, I was in Chem and Phys, and then I think there was a online, because it was COVID times, so with Mike Brook. He was trying to convince people to join SUSChem, and at the time, going into second year, and at the time, I just didn't know enough about it, and I was like, I'm pretty confident chemistry in itself is going to get me a career, so I don't know if I want to risk it into this sustainable chemistry. But can you address that? If there are students who are reluctant like me, the benefit or the difference between the two?
Absolutely. Since there's several aspects of chemistry, someone doing synthesis, for instance, might really like organic chemistry or inorganic chemistry, and they're doing synthesis. And then assessing it from the perspective of what a student is going to be doing in the future after graduating. Some might want to go to grad school, some might want to find work in industry or government. So I think they're all promising areas. What I like about sustainable chemistry is this is the future, right?
Yeah.
People are talking about sustainability. Some companies, now their board of directors would ask the company to demonstrate that they're able to meet some sustainability goals. You've got the UN sustainability goals. So this sounds like a very promising area now for students to be interested in. And the skills you're developing, you can transfer them, not just strictly to chemistry. You could use those concepts for something else in engineering, for processes in general.
And it just reminds you to stop and think about what you are doing and the consequences of your actions.
Absolutely,
It's definitely very important.
Absolutely. We're now trying to balance or reconcile between efficiency, prosperity in general, and how healthy the environment is now and in the far future.
I do think, so I took quite a few orgo courses, and I mean, I tried to understand it, but it was hard. I found that the hardest, or chemistry for me. And I thought, just as a student going through just like general organic, if they incorporated, sustainable principles into those, courses, so you didn't have to take designated sustainable chemistry courses. Is that something that Mac would kind of do in the future?
Absolutely. And we're having conversations around that. You don't have to take a sustainable chemistry course to apply some of the principles. So introducing that early, or getting students in general, not just students, PIs and labs, to think about the decisions that they're making day to day with that mindset that these decisions have impact on the environment. I remember Mike Burke talked about, was it the health and safety person that showed data on how much chemicals go into the sink?
Yeah. Crazy. Yeah. Like people just dump their stuff.
Just dump stuff.
With no regard.
No.
For where
So there's no awareness.
Yeah. I remember like when I was in second year, Sharona stopped me because she was, I think it was orgo for me, because I was cleaning glassware and I just was doing it in the sink. She's like, nah, no. You gotta rinse it with acetone, clean it, rinse it again. It's quite a process, but it's definitely necessary.
Absolutely.
And you think about all the shortcuts that,
Yes.
big companies especially would
Of
take.
course, and waste management, it's very expensive. So
Yeah.
people are trying to cut costs by all means.
Yeah.
So I agree with you that incorporating the principles into every aspect of chemistry is very important.
Definitely.
At the same time, we need people that specialize in it,
Yeah.
to do more stuff and design processes
Definitely.
and systems. So we're looking for more students to be more interested in.
Yeah. And is enrollment in SUSChem, is it steadily increasing?
It's quite stable. We're
Okay.
helping more students as the word goes around and people recognize the value in the course.
Yeah.
Then more students will be
and then
interested
hopefully
and come
more
on board.
schools and
More
it's a
schools.
global thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And like you touched on, like even beyond chemistry, like having sustainability in every kind of program.
Yeah,
really.
absolutely. Yeah, because the systems thinking, it's very, very important. And employability, especially if you combined the training with analytical chemistry and different aspects of chemistry, you have more options.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's definitely a great option. I think it's awesome that Mac has that.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like we're almost out of time.
Okay.
It's gone by pretty quick.
I didn't even realize that. Yeah.
I kick you out at 4:30. So. Is there anything briefly you might want to talk about?
Yeah, I think I've enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for the initiative. And
thank
for
you so
inviting
much for
me
coming.
Appreciate to chat with you. We should just keep doing what we're doing and knowing that chemists have a huge role to play in making the world better.
Well, thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks very much.
Really appreciate it. All right.
Okay. Bye.